On October 13, 1972, a chartered aircraft carrying 45 people, including a young Uruguayan rugby team, was heading toward the Andes Mountains on what was supposed to be a routine flight to Chile. The pilots were flying through heavy clouds and severe turbulence. Believing they had cleared the mountains and were closer to Santiago than they actually were, the crew made a fatal error and began their descent. As the clouds cleared, the pilots realized they were flying directly into a massive mountain peak. They desperately pulled up, but the aircraft's rear collided with the rock, tearing completely off. The remaining front portion of the fuselage slid down a glacier at 350 kilometers per hour before crashing into the snow at 3,570 meters. The cockpit was crushed, killing the pilots instantly. 33 people survived the initial impact, but as they stepped out into the freezing wasteland, they had just been thrust into one of the most hostile, alien environments on Earth. With no heavy winter clothing or mountaineering gear, the survivors faced immediate exposure. They were stranded in an impossibly vast mountain range, where temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius. In the immediate aftermath, the group followed the standard rules of survival. 2 young medical students, Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino, rushed to tend to the wounded, including 23-year-old Fernando Parrado, who was trapped in a coma. They stayed with the wreckage and waited for the authorities. Hearing search and rescue helicopters flying somewhere overhead, the survivors desperately tried to signal the outside world. They attempted to write SOS on the fuselage roof, but quickly ran out of lipstick. The rescue aircraft above couldn't see them anyway. The roof of Flight 571 was painted white, acting as perfect camouflage against the glacier and hiding them from the search teams directly overhead. Their reliance on an external rescue was ineffective. The environment had rendered them completely invisible to the outside world. 11 days into the ordeal, the group managed to rig a salvaged AM transistor radio to a crude improvised wire antenna. Tuning into a station, they heard a broadcast that delivered devastating news. After 142 hours, the international search operation had been officially canceled. The world had given up on them. The biological reality of their isolation was closing in. Their initial meager rations of chocolate bars, mussels, and dates were completely gone. With no plants or animals at 3,800 meters, they tried eating the cotton and leather out of the airplane seats, which only made them sick. Faced with death by starvation, Roberto Canessa proposed a harrowing necessity. To stay alive, they would have to consume the bodies of their friends and family lying in the snow. Days later, driven by absolute survival instinct, the group complied. After making that choice, the survivors stopped looking toward the sky for help. They were no longer victims waiting for a rescue that was never coming. They were now the only ones who could ensure they stayed alive. On October 29th, their 16th day on the mountain, a massive avalanche roared down the peak, crashing directly onto the wreckage. The sheer weight of the impact completely buried the broken fuselage under feet of dense snow, suffocating 8 more people instantly. The remaining 19 survivors were suddenly trapped. They spent 3 agonizing days huddled inside a cramped, freezing, and pitch-black space beneath the snowpack. Exhausted and starving, they forced themselves to dig a narrow tunnel upward through the packed ice, clawing by hand until they broke through. Digging themselves out of the avalanche cemented their final resolve. The mountain was an active predator. If they stayed inside that fuselage, they were going to die. On December 12, exactly 2 months after the initial crash, they launched a plan to escape the Andes on foot. Escaping required immense physical ingenuity. 18-year-old Carlos Miguel Rodriguez used a sewing kit to stitch the aircraft's thermal insulation into a massive sleeping bag to protect them from the freezing nights. Fernando Parrado and Roberto Canessa began the ascent. Without a map, a compass, or any climbing gear, the 2 young men scaled a nearly vertical glacier for 3 exhausting days. They pulled themselves up the final ridge, expecting to see the green valleys of Chile on the other side. Instead, when they reached the summit, they looked out at an endless 360-degree expanse of snow-covered mountain peaks. Parrado looked at the white horizon and told Canessa that they might be walking to their deaths, but that it was better than waiting to die in the fuselage. Instead of turning back, they began their descent toward the west. Parrado and Canessa hiked for a staggering 10 days. Driven by sheer willpower, they covered 61 kilometers on foot until the snow finally melted into the grassy river valleys of Chile. On December 20th, they spotted 3 men on horseback across a roaring, impassable river. One of them was a Chilean farmer named Sergio Catalan. The water was too loud for them to shout. Catalan threw a pencil and paper attached to a rock across the water. Parrado tied a desperate note to the rock, detailing the crash and their grueling 10-day walk, and hurled it back. The farmer immediately rode his horse for 10 hours to alert the army. On December 22nd, military helicopters tracked back to the fuselage and pulled the remaining 16 survivors from the ice. The 70-day ordeal remains a definitive study of human endurance. It serves as evidence that when faced with impossible odds, the will to survive can overcome the most hostile environments on Earth.